Rain soaked through Chloe's cardboard shelter long before dawn, chilling her to the bone. At 16, her entire world consisted of a stolen, frayed backpack and the brutal, unforgiving concrete of Seattle's back alleys. She had nothing. No family, no future, and barely enough hope to survive another shivering night. But beneath the grime coating her skin lay a bizarre destiny she couldn't possibly fathom. An abandoned, rotting flower farm miles out in the remote countryside was about to become hers. What she would soon unearth hidden deep within its dead, poisoned soil wouldn't just pull her off the streets, it would unravel a terrifying family secret that someone was willing to kill to keep buried forever. 16-year-old Chloe Montgomery had become invisible. It was a survival tactic she had perfected over 2 brutal years on the streets of downtown Seattle. When you are a runaway teenage girl, being seen meant being preyed upon, being reported, or worse, being sent back to the nightmare you had barely escaped. Chloe's descent into homelessness hadn't been a sudden plummet, but a slow, agonizing slide. Her mother, Sarah, had been her entire universe, a fiercely independent woman who worked double shifts at a local diner to keep a roof over their heads. But when Chloe was 14, aggressive pancreatic cancer had torn through Sarah like a wildfire. Within 6 months, Sarah was gone, leaving Chloe orphaned and utterly alone. With her father completely absent since her birth, the state had swiftly stepped in. Chloe was thrust into the foster care system, landing in the home of Cynthia and Todd Miller. On paper, the Millers were a respectable, church-going couple from Bellevue. In reality, their home was a house of horrors. Todd was a volatile alcoholic with a penchant for using his leather belt, and Cynthia turned a blind eye, treating Chloe as an unpaid maid who was locked in a basement room when social workers weren't around. After 6 months of bruising and starvation, Chloe shattered a basement window with a brick, climbed through the jagged glass, and ran into the freezing November night. She had never looked back. Now, she lived in the shadows of Pike Place Market in the damp alleys behind Pioneer Square. She survived on half-eaten bagels, tossed in dumpsters, the occasional dollar handed out by guilty-looking tourists, and an iron will to see the next sunrise. Her clothes hung loosely on her emaciated frame. Her once bright blonde hair was matted and hidden beneath a filthy gray beanie, and her blue eyes held the hollow, haunted stare of a combat veteran. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of dreary, mist-choked day Seattle was famous for, when her life fractured once again. Chloe was huddled beneath the awning of an abandoned storefront, trying to stay dry, when she noticed a woman in a sharp navy blue suit scanning the alleyway. Chloe instantly tensed. Social worker. Cop. Truant officer. Whatever the woman was, she meant trouble. Chloe grabbed her backpack, preparing to bolt. Chloe? Chloe Montgomery? The woman called out, her voice cutting through the hum of the city traffic. Chloe froze, her worn sneakers scraping against the wet pavement. Nobody had used her real name in over a year. She usually went by Kat on the streets. The woman didn't rush forward, sensing the teenager's panic. She held up her hands, clutching a manila envelope. Please, don't run. I'm not with Child Protective Services. My name is Patricia Higgins. I'm a private investigator hired by a law firm. I've been looking for you for 3 weeks. Chloe's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. I don't owe anybody anything. Leave me alone. You don't owe anyone, Chloe, Patricia said gently, taking a slow step forward, holding out the envelope. But someone left something to you. I have legally binding documents here. They require your signature. If you just sign them, I can give you what is inside and I will walk away. I swear it. Driven by a mixture of deep suspicion and gnawing desperation, maybe there was a $20 bill in there. Chloe snatched the envelope from the woman's hand, retreating 2 steps back. She ripped the seal open. Inside was a thick stack of legal papers bearing the letterhead of Pendleton and Vance, attorneys at law. Pinned to the front was a typed letter. Chloe's eyes scanned the words, her breath hitching. To the legal guardian, or in the event of emancipation, Miss Chloe Montgomery, it is with deep regret that we inform you of the passing of your maternal aunt, Josephine Abernathy, on October 12th. As Miss Abernathy died without a spouse or children, and as her sister Sarah preceded her in death, you are the sole surviving heir to her estate. Aunt Josephine? Chloe whispered, her voice raspy from disuse. She barely remembered the woman. Sarah had rarely spoken of her sister, only mentioning that Josephine was eccentric, lived entirely off the grid in rural Washington, and that they had suffered a massive falling out over a decade ago. She owned a property, Patricia explained softly, watching the shock wash over the young girl. It's a commercial flower farm out near Snohomish. 70 acres of land, a farmhouse, and several greenhouse facilities. It's yours now, Chloe. The deed is in that envelope. Chloe looked from the papers to the investigator, her mind spinning. A house, land, a place that belonged to her. A place where there were no Todd Millers, no freezing alleyways, no police flashing their sirens at her to move along. What's the catch, Chloe asked, her street-hardened instincts flaring. Nothing in this world is free. Patricia sighed, a look of genuine pity crossing her professional features. The catch is that the property is completely derelict. Your aunt died in massive debt. There are over $30,000 in back taxes owed to the county. If those taxes aren't paid within 60 days, the state will foreclose, seize the land, and auction it off. Furthermore, because you are 16, the state would normally assign a financial guardian, but your aunts will specifically establish a trust that bypassed the foster system entirely, naming you as the sole executor upon her death. It's an aggressive legal loophole her lawyer managed to secure. Chloe looked down at the deed. Abernathy Blooms. There's a bus ticket in there too, Patricia added, and $200 in cash from the law firm for travel expenses. What you do next is up to you, Chloe. But I wouldn't get your hopes up about the farm. From what I hear, it's a ruin. That night, for the first time in 2 years, Chloe didn't sleep on concrete. She sat in the back of a Greyhound bus rolling northward through the dark, rain-slicked highways, a warm cup of gas station coffee in her hands, and a heavy, terrifying glimmer of hope in her chest. The bus dropped Chloe off at a desolate crossroads just outside the town limits of Snohomish early the next morning. The sky was the color of a bruised plum, heavy with the threat of an impending storm. Clutching her backpack and a hand-drawn map the investigator had provided, Chloe began the 3-mile trek down a muddy, unpaved logging road. The air out here smelled entirely different from Seattle. Gone was the stench of exhaust, stale beer, and damp garbage. Here, the air was thick with the scent of wet pine, decaying leaves, and rich, damp earth. As she walked, her anxiety mounted. She had spent the $200 on a cheap sleeping bag, some non-perishable food, a heavy flashlight, and a sturdy pair of waterproof boots at a thrift store. If this farm was a bust, she had just stranded herself in the middle of nowhere. After an hour of walking, the dense tree line finally broke. Chloe stopped dead in her tracks, her heart sinking into her stomach. A rusted, wrought iron archway hung precariously over a gravel driveway, the metal letters spelling out Abernathy Blooms dangling by a single bolt. Beyond the gate lay absolute devastation. Patricia Higgins hadn't exaggerated. The farm was a ruin. Nature had aggressively reclaimed what humanity had abandoned. Knee-high weeds choked the expansive front yard. To the left stood a sprawling Victorian-style farmhouse that looked like a rotting corpse. Its white paint was peeling off in diseased gray strips. The porch roof had partially collapsed, and half the windows were boarded up or shattered. But it was the greenhouses that truly captured the scale of the disaster. Stretching out behind the house were 5 massive, industrial-sized glass structures. Or what used to be glass. The frames were twisted and rusted, and thousands of panes of glass lay shattered on the ground, sparkling like a blanket of jagged ice. Inside the skeletal structures, a chaotic jungle of dead, blackened vines and aggressive briar patches had completely overtaken the rusted planting tables. It looked less like a flower farm and more like the site of a biological disaster. Chloe swallowed the lump of despair in her throat. This is yours, she reminded herself. It's a roof. It's a door you can lock. It's better than an alley. She carefully navigated the driveway, avoiding chunks of broken glass and rusted farming equipment half buried in the mud. She approached the farmhouse, stepping gingerly onto the rotting wooden porch. The front door was slightly ajar, hanging off its bottom hinge. Chloe pushed it open, the hinges screaming in protest. Inside, the air was stagnant, smelling of mildew, dust, and animal droppings. She clicked on her new flashlight, sweeping the beam across a living room trapped in time. Furniture was covered in moth-eaten sheets. Stacks of old newspapers dating back 5 years formed dusty pillars against the peeling floral wallpaper. The floorboards groaned beneath her boots. It was profoundly creepy, the kind of house local kids would dare each other to break into on Halloween. Before she could explore the kitchen, the sudden crunch of heavy tires on the gravel outside made her jump. Panic spiked instantly. She instinctively ducked below the windowsill, peering out through a crack in the dirty glass. A sleek, black Range Rover, a vehicle that looked violently out of place in this decay, had pulled into her driveway. The driver's side door opened, and a man stepped out. He was in his late 40s, dressed in an expensive gray wool coat and polished leather boots. He had silver hair slicked back and a face that looked like it was permanently set in a sneer of impatience. He didn't walk toward the house. Instead, he stood by his car, looking at the rotting greenhouses with a look of intense, predatory satisfaction. Chloe tightened her grip on her flashlight, her street survival instincts roaring to life. She didn't hide. If this was her land, she needed to act like it. She pushed the front door open and stepped out onto the sagging porch, squaring her shoulders. The man looked up, feigning surprise, though his cold, calculating eyes suggested he knew exactly who she was. "Well, well," he called out, his voice smooth and dripping with artificial warmth. "You must be the niece. Chloe, isn't it? I heard you were finally tracked down." "Who are you? You're trespassing," Chloe yelled back, trying to keep her voice from shaking. The man chuckled, stepping closer to the porch, though he kept his polished boots out of the mud. "My name is Richard Sterling. I own Sterling Developments. We build luxury subdivisions. I own the property bordering yours to the east, the south, and the west. This little eyesore is the only piece of the puzzle I don't own." "It's not for sale," Chloe said firmly. Richard's smile vanished, replaced by a patronizing sigh. "Listen to me, sweetheart. I know your situation. I know you've been living out of dumpsters in Seattle. I also know this property is in tax default for $34,000. In exactly 59 days, the county is going to evict you, seize this land, and I am going to buy it at auction for pennies on the dollar." He reached into his designer coat and pulled out a thick stack of $100 bills, bound by a paper band. He tossed it onto the bottom step of the porch. It hit the rotting wood with a heavy thud. "That is $5,000 in cash," Richard said, his eyes locking onto hers. "Right here, right now. You sign a quitclaim deed over to me, and you can walk away from this nightmare with enough money to get an apartment, get a hot meal, and start your life over. If you stay, you will freeze to death in that rotting house, and in 2 months, you will leave with absolutely nothing. Don't be stupid like your aunt was." Chloe stared at the stack of cash. $5,000. It was more money than she had ever seen in her life. It meant safety, it meant warmth, it meant food. But then she looked at Richard Sterling. She recognized his type. She had met men like him on the streets, men who offered you $20 to get into their cars, their eyes filled with a dark, consuming greed, men who smiled while they laid traps. He wasn't offering her a lifeline. He was trying to steal something valuable. If he was willing to hand over $5,000 in cash on a whim to a homeless teenager, this land was worth infinitely more. And his passing comment about her aunt, "Don't be stupid like your aunt was," ignited a spark of defiant anger in Chloe's chest. Chloe walked down the porch steps. She didn't pick up the money. Instead, she kicked the stack of bills right back into the mud at Richard's feet. "Get off my property," Chloe said, her voice dropping to a dangerous, steady register. "Before I call the police." Richard's face flushed with sudden, vicious rage. He looked at the mud-stained money, then back up at the defiant, filthy teenager. The mask of the polite businessman slipped, revealing something deeply ugly underneath. "Your Aunt Josephine was a stubborn, paranoid old fool," Richard snarled, leaning in. "She thought she could hide what she had. She thought she could outplay me. Look where it got her. Dead, insane, and bankrupt. You think you can survive out here, little girl? The roof is caving in, the water is shut off, and you have no idea what you're actually sitting on." He bent down, snatched his money from the mud, and stormed back to his Range Rover. "I'll give you a week," he shouted over the roar of the engine. "When you're starving and freezing, you'll come begging to me, but the price drops to $2,000. He slammed the door, threw the SUV into reverse, and sped away, spitting gravel in his wake. Chloe stood alone in the silence of the dead farm, her heart pounding. She looked back at the ruined greenhouses. "You have no idea what you're actually sitting on." Richard Sterling wasn't just a developer looking to build houses. He wanted this specific farm. And judging by his rage, he had been trying to get it from Aunt Josephine for a very long time. Whatever had ruined this farm wasn't bad business or laziness. It was a war. And Chloe had just enlisted. The first night in the farmhouse was a trial by terror. As the sun dipped beneath the tree line, plunging the property into absolute darkness, the house seemed to come alive. The wind howled through the cracked windows like a chorus of grieving women. The old pipes groaned in the walls, and the scurrying sounds of mice in the ceiling kept Chloe awake for hours. She huddled in her new sleeping bag on a dusty sofa in the living room, a heavy, rusted fire poker she found by the hearth gripped tightly in her hand. When morning finally broke, filtering gray, watery light through the filthy windows, Chloe felt a renewed sense of determination. She was exhausted, hungry, and cold, but she was entirely alone, and for the first time in years, she was safe from the predators of the city. She needed to understand what Richard Sterling meant. What was she sitting on? She spent the morning clearing out the kitchen, sweeping away layers of debris and animal nests. She found a hand pump for well water in the backyard that miraculously still functioned, though the water came out rusty brown before finally running clear. She washed her face, ate a dry protein bar, and set her sights on the greenhouses. The first 4 greenhouses were a total loss. They were massive iron rib tunnels filled with nothing but shattered terracotta pots, dry soil, and the skeletal remains of what looked like standard commercial roses and lilies. The glass roofs had been systematically smashed in not by weather, Chloe realized as she examined the debris, but by blunt force. Someone had taken a baseball bat to the panes. Vandalism. Or sabotage. Then she reached the 5th greenhouse, situated at the very back of the property, bordering a dense line of ancient, towering Douglas firs. Unlike the others, this greenhouse's glass was entirely intact, but it had been painted completely black from the inside, blocking out all sunlight. The double doors at the front were secured not with a simple latch, but with a heavy, industrial-grade steel chain and an enormous brass padlock. Chloe rattled the chain. It was unyielding. Whoever had locked this had wanted to keep the world out, or keep something in. She wasn't going to be deterred. She marched back to the house, rummaged through an attached tool shed, and found a heavy iron sledgehammer. It took her 20 minutes of exhausting, sweat-drenched swinging to finally shatter the brass padlock. It gave way with a loud crack that echoed across the empty farm. Chloe unwound the heavy chain, letting it fall to the dirt, and pushed the heavy wooden doors open. The air inside hit her like a physical wall. Despite the cold outside, it was suffocatingly warm and intensely humid in here, smelling sharply of rich loam, potent chemicals, and an unusual, sweet, intoxicating floral scent that made her head spin slightly. She clicked on her flashlight, sweeping the beam through the darkness. The interior was vastly different from the other structures. It was highly organized. There were rows of heavy-duty, stainless steel planting tables, complex irrigation tubes hanging from the ceiling, and massive UV grow lamps, though the power was dead. At the very center of the greenhouse was a structure that made Chloe pause. It was a secondary, smaller room built inside the greenhouse, constructed of thick, reinforced plexiglass, almost like a clean room in a laboratory. She approached the plexiglass room, the door was unlocked, she pushed it open. Inside, sitting on a solitary metal table, was a single, massive pot. The soil in it was dark, almost black, and moist. But what was growing out of it made Chloe gasp. Even in the beam of her flashlight, the plant was breathtaking. It was a vine-like orchid, but the blossoms weren't normal. They were enormous, easily the size of dinner plates, and their petals were a deep, luminescent, almost glowing sapphire blue, veined with a striking metallic silver. Chloe had never seen anything like it. It didn't look like a plant that belonged on Earth. Next to the pot, resting on the metal table, was a thick, leather-bound ledger and a heavy iron lockbox. Chloe set her flashlight down so it illuminated the table. She opened the ledger. The pages were filled with Aunt Josephine's frantic, erratic handwriting. It wasn't a diary. It was a scientific log. Pages upon pages of chemical formulas, soil pH balances, cross-pollination charts, and genetic sequencing notes that Chloe couldn't even begin to understand. But as she flipped toward the back of the book, the clinical notes devolved into panicked journal entries. August 12th. The hybridization is stable. By God, it's finally stable. The cerulean strain. I sent the compound sample to the lab in Seattle anonymously. The results came back today. I was right. The alkaloid concentration in the petals doesn't just reduce tumor growth, it actively necroticizes cancer cells in vitro without damaging surrounding tissue. It's a miracle cure, but I've made a terrible mistake. September 4th, Sterling knows. He found out about the lab results, he came to the house today, he offered me $2 million for the patent and the seeds. When I told him I was taking it to the Federal Health Board directly so the pharmaceutical companies couldn't bury it or charge exorbitant prices, he threatened me. He told me accidents happen on old farms. September 18th, they smashed the main greenhouses last night, destroyed my entire commercial crop. I have no income. The bank is calling about the taxes. Sterling is suffocating me. He wants to bankrupt me so he can take the land and the cerulean strain for nothing. October 2nd, I am sick. So very sick. I think someone tampered with the well water. My hair is falling out. I can't keep food down. Sterling was watching from his SUV today, just watching the house. I don't have much time. I cannot let him have the strain. I've locked it down. I've hidden the seeds. If I die, everything goes to Sarah's girl. Maybe she will have the strength I lack. Chloe's hands were shaking violently as she read the final entry. Her aunt hadn't died of natural causes, and she hadn't gone bankrupt because of bad business. She had bred a botanical miracle, a cure for the very disease that had killed Chloe's mother, and Richard Sterling had murdered her for it. Chloe turned her attention to the heavy iron lockbox sitting next to the ledger. There was no keyhole. It was secured by a 4-digit combination lock. She thought for a moment, her mind racing. What number would Josephine use? A date? She looked back at the ledger, scanning the frantic notes, but nothing stood out. Then, a memory hit her. A memory from her childhood, of her mother crying on the phone, screaming at someone. You never forgave me for leaving on my 18th birthday, Josie. Her mother's birthday, May 14th, 0514. Chloe reached out, her fingers trembling as she spun the cold metal dials. 0, 5, 1, 4. She grabbed the heavy latch and pulled. With a loud clack, the lock disengaged. Chloe threw open the lid of the box. She shined her flashlight inside, her breath catching in her throat. The box wasn't filled with gold or jewelry. It was divided into 2 compartments. On the left side were thick, neatly banded stacks of crisp $100 bills. Dozens of them. A note was taped to the top bundle in Josephine's handwriting. Tax money, keep the farm. But it was the right side of the box that made Chloe's blood run cold. It was filled with hundreds of tiny sealed glass vials. Inside each vial were thousands of microscopic, shimmering silver seeds. The legacy of the cerulean strain. The cure. She had a fortune in cash to save her home and a biological goldmine that could change the world. Suddenly, the heavy wooden doors of the greenhouse, which Chloe had left slightly open, slammed shut with a thunderous bang, plunging the massive space into pitch blackness save for her small flashlight beam. Then came the sound of the heavy steel chain rattling loudly, followed by the distinct click of a new padlock snapping shut from the outside. I told you. A muffled, cruel voice called out from the other side of the glass. It was Richard Sterling. Accidents happen on old farms. Before Chloe could scream, the unmistakable scent of gasoline began pouring through the cracks under the greenhouse door. The unmistakable, cloying reek of unleaded gasoline overpowered the humid, floral air of the greenhouse in seconds. It pooled beneath the heavy wooden doors, a toxic serpent slithering across the dark soil. Chloe didn't scream. 2 years on the streets of Seattle had beaten the panic out of her, replacing it with a hyper-focused, icy will to survive. Screaming wasted oxygen. Screaming meant you were a victim. Outside, the snick hiss of a heavy silver lighter echoed through the shattered glass of the neighboring structures. Nothing personal, kid. Richard Sterling's voice drifted through the walls, muffled but laced with a terrifying casualness. Just cleaning up loose ends. A brilliant flash of orange illuminated the crack beneath the door. The gasoline caught with a concussive whoosh. Instantly, a wall of roaring fire climbed the interior wooden frame of the greenhouse. The flames chewed through the dry, dead vines hanging near the entrance, spreading with unnatural speed toward the center where Chloe stood. The heat was instantaneous and punishing, a physical weight pressing down on her lungs. She had less than 2 minutes before the oxygen was completely consumed or the roof collapsed. Moving with frantic precision, Chloe shoved the stacks of $100 bills, the heavy leather ledger, and the precious vials of the cerulean strain into her frayed backpack. She zipped it tight and hurled it over her shoulders, pulling the straps so hard they dug into her collarbones. She grabbed the heavy iron sledgehammer from the dirt. The front doors were a wall of fire, locked from the outside. Her only way out was through the black painted glass walls. She ran to the far end of the greenhouse, furthest from the blaze. Smoke was already pooling at the ceiling, descending rapidly in a thick, choking blanket of toxic gray. Chloe coughed, her eyes watering profusely, blinding her. She raised the sledgehammer overhead, muscles screaming in protest, and swung with everything she had at the reinforced side panel. Clang. The hammer bounced off. It wasn't just standard glass, it was tempered safety glass, designed to withstand heavy hail and falling branches. Panic finally clawed at her throat. The fire was roaring now, a deafening inferno consuming the planting tables. A glass pane near the ceiling shattered from the intense heat, raining molten shards down around her. Come on! Chloe screamed, adjusting her grip. She remembered a trick an old homeless veteran had taught her about breaking car windows. You don't hit the center, you hit the corner where the tension is highest. She aimed for the bottom right corner of the pane, planting her boots firmly in the dirt. She swung. Crack. A spiderweb of fractures exploded across the black glass. The heat at her back was unbearable. Her jacket was beginning to singe. She swung again, harder this time, fueled by pure, unadulterated adrenaline. The pane shattered outward in a spectacular explosion of glass. Chloe didn't hesitate. She threw herself through the jagged opening, tucking her head and rolling as she hit the muddy ground outside. Jagged teeth of glass sliced through her jeans and tore a deep gash down her left forearm. But the agonizing pain was eclipsed by the freezing rush of clean night air. She scrambled to her feet, gasping for breath, smoke pouring from her clothes. Behind her, the greenhouse was a towering inferno, illuminating the desolate farm in a demonic orange glow. Through the roaring flames, she heard the frantic crunch of boots on gravel. She broke out! Back there! A deep, unfamiliar voice shouted. Sterling wasn't alone. He had brought help. Chloe didn't look back. She clutched her bleeding arm and bolted past the tree line, plunging into the dense, unforgiving darkness of the Snohomish woods. The Pacific Northwest forest at night is a hostile, disorienting labyrinth. For hours, Chloe pushed through dense thickets of blackberry brambles that shredded her clothes and skin. The icy rain returned, a torrential downpour that soaked her to the bone but mercifully washed away the scent of smoke that clung to her hair, making it harder for Sterling's men to track her. She navigated by the faint glow of the highway miles in the distance, a trick she'd learned navigating the urban sprawl. By dawn, she was hypothermic, bleeding, and entirely exhausted. She collapsed against the trunk of a massive, rotting cedar, her legs finally refusing to carry her any further. She unzipped her backpack with numb, trembling fingers. The cash was safe, the ledger was safe, the vials, wrapped securely in her spare shirt, were intact. She was holding a miracle, but she was going to die in the mud before she could show it to anyone. Think, Chloe. Think. She couldn't go to the Snohomish police? If Richard Sterling was brazen enough to burn a teenager alive, he undoubtedly had local law enforcement in his deep pockets. She needed to get out of the county. She needed an adult. Only one person had treated her with a shred of dignity in the last 2 years. Dragging herself upright, Chloe limped the final mile to a solitary, rundown gas station sitting on the edge of Highway 9. The teenage attendant behind the counter took one look at the blood-soaked, filthy, shivering girl and reached for the phone. "Don't call the cops," Chloe croaked, dropping a crisp $100 bill onto the counter. "Just let me use the landline, please." 5 minutes later, she was huddled in the station's bathroom, listening to the dial tone ring. Patricia Higgins, the crisp, professional voice, answered. "He tried to kill me," Chloe whispered, her voice breaking. "Richard Sterling. He burned the farm. He locked me inside." There was a stunned silence on the other end. "Chloe, where are you? Are you safe?" "I'm at a gas station on Highway 9. "Patricia, the law firm you work for. Pendleton and Hayes. Did they tell you what was on this farm?" "They told me it was a tax write-off," Patricia said, her voice dropping into a tense, rapid cadence. "Chloe, listen to me very carefully. When I submitted the paperwork saying I found you, Hayes personally called Richard Sterling. I thought it was just standard real estate notification. But this morning, they shredded your aunt's physical file. Something is terribly wrong. My aunt cured cancer, Patricia. I have the seeds. And Sterling murdered her for them." The silence this time lasted longer. When Patricia spoke again, the corporate investigator was gone. What remained was a woman who realized she had been used as a pawn in a deadly game. "Stay in the bathroom," Patricia ordered. "Lock the door. Do not come out for anyone but me. I'm leaving Seattle now." Patricia arrived in an unmarked, charcoal gray sedan 2 agonizing hours later. When she pushed open the glass door of the gas station, her professional, composed demeanor cracked. Seeing the deep, ragged gash on Chloe's arm, the soot smeared across her pale face, and the singed, melted edges of her blonde hair, the investigator's face went chalk white. She quickly ushered the shivering teenager into the heated car, locked the doors, and immediately produced a heavy-duty first aid kit and a steaming thermos of black coffee. "We are bypassing local police entirely," Patricia said, her voice tight with suppressed rage as she expertly merged onto the southbound lanes of the I-5 freeway. Rain lashed against the windshield, blurring the taillights of the morning commuters. Sterling owns half the commercial real estate in Snohomish County. He donates to the police benevolent funds. He probably plays golf with the district judges. If we walk into a local precinct with this story, you'll be in a juvenile detention cell by noon, and those seeds will vanish into an evidence locker forever. Chloe winced as she wrapped her forearm in sterile gauze, her eyes darting to the rearview mirror. Every black SUV that passed them made her pulse spike, expecting Sterling's men to run them off the road. So, where are we going? To the one place that has the infrastructure to verify Josephine's work and the institutional power to resist being bought off, Patricia replied, accelerating past the speed limit. The Fred Hutchinson Cancer Center in Seattle, I have a close contact there, Dr. William Caldwell. He's one of the top oncological researchers on the West Coast. I ran a highly sensitive, off-the-books background check for him years ago during a messy corporate espionage case. He owes me his career. They arrived at the sprawling, ultra-modern medical complex just after noon. Chloe felt acutely, painfully out of place. Surrounded by pristine white walls, gleaming glass architecture, and distinguished medical professionals in tailored coats, she was a walking disaster smelling of wood smoke, sweat, and dried blood, clutching a filthy backpack like a shield. Dr. Caldwell met them in a secure, subterranean laboratory restricted by biometric scanners. He was a tall, severe-looking man in his late 60s with piercing, analytical gray eyes and a permanent frown. He listened to Chloe's frantic story with his arms crossed tightly over his chest, his skepticism radiating off him in waves. Patricia, I respect you, but this sounds like a paranoid delusion, Dr. Caldwell sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. A miracle cure bred in a rotting greenhouse by a hermit? Do you know how many millions of dollars we pour into targeted therapies every month? Chloe didn't argue. She simply unzipped her battered backpack, pulled out the heavy leather ledger, and laid it on the stainless steel examination table. Dr. Caldwell frowned, pulling a pair of reading glasses from his pocket. He opened the book. His eyes began to fly over Josephine's frantic, densely packed handwriting. Josephine Abernathy, doctor, Caldwell murmured, tracing a complex molecular diagram of a hybridized cell wall. His dismissive posture slowly dissolved. I know this name. She was a brilliant botanist at the university, published several groundbreaking, controversial papers on rare alkaloid extraction in the late 90s before she completely dropped off the grid. The academic community thought she suffered a psychological break. She didn't lose her mind, Chloe said fiercely, her street-hardened edge cutting through the sterile quiet of the lab. She found something, and she died trying to protect it. Dr. Caldwell carefully took one of the sealed glass vials from Chloe. Using a pair of precision tweezers, he extracted a single, shimmering silver seed. It caught the harsh fluorescent light, looking more like a microscopic gemstone than organic matter. I need to run a rapid mass spectrometry analysis and a reagent stress test on this. It will take at least an hour. Do not leave this room. That hour was a suffocating eternity. Every time the heavy laboratory doors hissed, Chloe expected to see Richard Sterling's private security team pouring through with drawn weapons. Patricia paced the length of the room, burning through 2 burner phones as she texted unseen contacts. When Dr. Caldwell finally returned, he looked as though the ground beneath him had shifted. He was pale, his hands trembling slightly as he placed a printed, multi-page readout on the steel table. I ran it 3 times to be absolutely certain, Dr. Caldwell whispered, looking at the teenager with a mixture of shock and profound awe. The compound stability within the seed casing contains an uncatalogued, highly resilient alkaloid structure. It doesn't degrade under thermal stress. But more importantly, preliminary reagent testing shows the compound aggressively binds to malignant protein markers while entirely ignoring healthy cellular structures. The toxicity levels are effectively 0. No hepatotoxicity, no kidney degradation. English William, Patricia demanded, stepping forward. It's a guided missile, Dr. Caldwell breathed. Unlike traditional chemotherapy agents that carpet bomb the body with poison, this botanical extract specifically hunts and necroticizes cancer cells. If her aunt managed to stabilize the hybridization of this strain, Patricia, it is worth billions. It's a complete paradigm shift in modern pharmacology. No wonder Sterling wanted her dead. Before the weight of that revelation could fully settle over them, Patricia's primary phone vibrated loudly. She checked the encrypted screen and her jaw clenched so hard a muscle ticked in her cheek. We have a massive problem, Patricia said, her voice dropping to a grim, urgent register. Sterling didn't wait for us to go to the cops. He went on the offensive. He's weaponized his legal team. My contact at the King County Courthouse just tipped me off. What did he do? Chloe asked, her heart hammering against her ribs. Sterling's lawyers filed an emergency federal injunction an hour ago, Patricia explained rapidly, swiping through the message on her phone. They are claiming that a runaway teenager named Chloe Montgomery broke into Sterling's private, off-site laboratory in Snohomish, stole proprietary corporate botanical research, and committed arson to cover her tracks. He's framing me? Chloe gasped. The sheer audacity of the lie taking her breath away. He's using the legal system to freeze the board, Dr. Caldwell interjected, his eyes darkening. It's a classic corporate chokehold. If you try to go to the press or the police with this discovery now, the FBI will instantly confiscate the seeds and the ledger as stolen corporate property pending an investigation. Exactly, Patricia agreed. It will trigger a civil litigation battle that will last a decade. A battle Sterling will easily win because he has a bottomless legal fund and you are an undocumented, emancipated minor. He will produce forged employment contracts dating back years, claiming he hired Josephine as an independent contractor. He will legally steal her legacy and you will go to prison for arson. Silence descended on the laboratory. The trap was masterfully set. Sterling had successfully boxed them into a corner where the law itself was his greatest weapon. Then we don't fight him in civil court, Chloe said. The panic in her chest suddenly evaporated, replaced by the cold, calculating survival instinct that had kept her alive in the Seattle alleys. If a predator was blocking the alleyway, you didn't fight him head on. You dropped a fire escape on his head. Chloe, you don't understand the power this man has, Patricia started. We fight him for murder, Chloe interrupted, stepping up to the steel table. She flipped the heavy leather ledger to the back pages, slamming her finger down on the entry dated October 2nd. I am sick. So very sick. I think someone tampered with the well water. My hair is falling out. I can't keep food down. Dr. Caldwell, Chloe asked, looking up at the researcher, her blue eyes blazing. If someone was poisoning a water supply, what specific chemical would cause your hair to fall out in clumps and your stomach to violently reject food, but would successfully mimic the symptoms of a rapid, natural, degenerative disease? Dr. Caldwell frowned, adjusting his glasses to read the frantic notes. His medical mind clicked into gear. Heavy metal poisoning, specifically thallium. It's colorless, odorless, and completely tasteless. It was banned in the United States decades ago for exactly this reason. It causes aggressive neurological and gastrointestinal failure. But to a rural doctor, it just looks like a sudden, severe illness. Chloe looked at Patricia, the puzzle pieces snapping together with lethal precision. Sterling owns Sterling Developments. He does massive industrial construction and excavation. He would have the necessary black market contacts and the logistical cover to acquire restricted heavy metals like thallium, Patricia finished, her eyes widening as the strategy materialized. If we can somehow prove he bought it. It's better than a paper trail, Chloe said, a fierce predatory smile touching her lips. The well water at the farm. Yesterday morning, I pumped the handle for 5 minutes. The water ran rusty brown and full of thick sediment before it finally cleared. That sediment has been sitting stagnant in those old iron pipes since the day my aunt died. Chloe looked between the two stunned adults. If you test the water inside those pipes at the farm right now, the thallium will still be there. They didn't risk going anywhere near the Snohomish police, nor did they wait for morning. Patricia drove straight to the FBI field office in downtown Seattle, bypassing the bureaucratic red tape at the front desk entirely. She used every ounce of leverage and every favor she had accrued in her decade as a corporate investigator to secure an emergency, off-the-books meeting with Special Agent Thomas Kessler. Kessler was a seasoned, cynical veteran of the white-collar crime division, a man known for his ruthless, bulldog-like pursuit of corporate corruption. At 3 a.m., inside a stark, fluorescent-lit interrogation room, Chloe laid her aunt's heavy leather ledger on the steel table. Next to it, Doctor. Caldwell placed the mass spectrometry printouts. Kessler listened to their frantic story with his arms crossed, his face an unreadable mask of weary skepticism. Runaway teens and rogue botanists didn't usually land on his desk, but when Dr. Caldwell walked him through the cellular targeting of the cerulean strain, and Chloe pointed to the frantic final entries describing the hair loss and nausea, the atmosphere in the room shifted violently. Thallium, Kessler muttered, leaning forward to inspect the chaotic handwriting. His cynical demeanor vanished, replaced by the sharp, predatory focus of a hunter who had just caught a scent. If he used thallium to simulate a degenerative disease, he would have had to source it illegally, Sterling Developments has heavy industrial contracts. It wouldn't be hard for him to hide the purchase in an excavation ledger. The well water at the farm is still tainted with it, Chloe added, her voice steady despite the exhaustion clawing at her mind. I pumped it myself. The sediment is sitting in the old iron pipes right now. Kessler didn't hesitate. He picked up the desk phone and began barking orders. Within the hour, he had dispatched a federal hazmat unit to the Abernathy farm to secure the water samples and filed an emergency, sealed exhumation order for Josephine Abernathy's remains. The federal machine roared to life, and the trap closed around Richard Sterling with breathtaking, silent speed. 3 days later, Richard Sterling was standing in his sprawling penthouse office in downtown Bellevue. He was pouring himself a glass of 25-year-old single malt scotch, looking out through the floor-to-ceiling windows at the glittering Seattle skyline. He was expecting a triumphant phone call from his legal team, confirming the seizure of the runaway girl and the successful acquisition of the Snohomish property. Instead, the heavy mahogany doors of his office were violently breached. A dozen armed FBI agents swarmed the penthouse. Sterling dropped his crystal glass, the expensive amber liquid soaking into the Persian rug as he immediately began screaming about lawsuits, demanding his attorneys, and threatening to end the careers of everyone in the room. Agent Kessler stepped through the perimeter of agents, holding a thick manila folder. He didn't look intimidated, he looked profoundly satisfied. Richard Sterling, you are under arrest for the first-degree murder of Josephine Abernathy, corporate espionage, and federal arson, Kessler announced, his voice carrying over Sterling's bluster. We found the thallium in the well, Richard. We found it in Josephine's bone marrow, and we found the wire transfer to an offshore shell company you used to buy it. The color drained from Sterling's face completely. The mask of the untouchable billionaire shattered, leaving only a terrified, pathetic man realizing his empire had just collapsed. He was dragged out of his glass tower in handcuffs, his humiliation broadcast live as local news helicopters circled overhead. As for Chloe, the media circus that followed threatened to swallow her whole, but she was no longer a solitary, defenseless runaway. She had Patricia fiercely guarding her privacy, and she had the formidable legal backing of the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Center. Using the massive stacks of cash hidden in her aunt's lockbox, Patricia helped Chloe pay off the county tax debt in full, permanently securing the deed to the 70 acres in Chloe's name. But Chloe knew that owning the land wasn't enough. Richard Sterling had offered millions for the cerulean strain, and other pharmaceutical vultures were already circling, eager to buy the patent, bury the research, or charge astronomical prices for the cure. Chloe refused them all. Guided by the desperate, hopeful notes in her aunt's ledger, Chloe legally emancipated herself and established the Abernathy Botanical Foundation, a nonprofit trust dedicated to developing the cerulean strain into a highly accessible, low-cost oncological treatment. Dr. Caldwell resigned from his previous post to become the head of research for the newly formed institute. A year and a half later, the rotting, terrifying ruins of the farm had been completely erased. The shattered, rusted greenhouses had been dismantled and replaced by a sprawling complex of state-of-the-art, climate-controlled botanical laboratories, funded by massive federal health grants. Chloe Montgomery stood on the newly rebuilt porch of the Victorian farmhouse, breathing in the crisp, clean air of the Snohomish countryside. The heavy, suffocating burden of the streets was completely gone from her posture. She wore a clean-fitted jacket, her bright blonde hair was pulled back neatly, and the haunted, hollow stare of a victim had been entirely replaced by the fierce, unyielding fire of a protector. The faint, silvery scar running down her left forearm was the only physical reminder of the night she had fought through fire to save her legacy. She looked out across the lush, manicured property toward the gleaming glass structures. Inside those secure walls, thousands of luminescent, sapphire blue orchids were blooming in perfect rows, their metallic silver veins catching the morning sunlight. From a poisoned well in a forgotten, abandoned plot of dirt, a profound miracle had finally taken root. And the teenage girl who had once been left with absolutely nothing had just given the world a second chance at life. What a breathtaking journey. Chloe's incredible transformation from a forgotten runaway on the unforgiving streets of Seattle to the fierce protector of a world-changing medical miracle proves that the most valuable treasures are often hidden in the darkest places. Her resilience against Richard Sterling's ruthless greed isn't just a story of survival, it's a powerful testament to justice, family legacy, and the indomitable human spirit. The Abernathy farm stands as a beacon of hope, reminding us that no matter how deep the rot goes, new life can always bloom. If Chloe's gripping fight for justice and her aunt's incredible legacy kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button. Don't forget to share this incredible story with your friends to spread the inspiration, and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling, real-life tales of triumph against all odds. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload.